Good evening, and welcome to episode 8 of A Story of Grief. This episode discusses childhood grief, the serious illness of a loved one, stroke, hospitalisation, surgery, physical deterioration, death, funeral memories, family trauma, emotional distress, and the lasting impact of losing someone important at a young age. If this feels too heavy today, it's okay to pause and it's okay to come back later. This episode is about grief remembered through the eyes of someone who was a child at the time trying to survive it. It's not a child speaking now, but an adult looking back at what grief did to him when he was young. And I think that matters, because sometimes we only understand our childhood grief properly years later. At the time, we may not have the words, we may not understand the medical terms, and we may not fully grasp why adults are crying, why the house feels different, why school suddenly feels impossible, or why one person's absence can change the shape of an entire family. But the body remembers, the mind remembers, the heart remembers. And years later, when we look back, we can finally see that the child we were was not being dramatic. They were grieving. They were scared and trying to make sense of something far too big for them to hold. Now, this story was sent to me anonymously by someone who had lost his nan after she had suffered a severe stroke in 2015. He was only 12 when the stroke happened at the time and 13 when she had passed away. Now, as an adult, he looks back on that time with the kind of clarity that only years can give. He remembers the phone call, the hospital, the fear of seeing someone he loved changed by illness, and the hope when she seemed to improve, and of course the devastation when she had passed away. And he remembers the little things too, because grief always keeps the little things, such as the sofa, the garden, the Lego, the £2 she gave him when nobody else was looking, the place she used to sit, and the empty seat that still means something all these years later. So I'm going to read his words exactly as he sent them to me. This is his memory, his grief, his nan, and his adult self reaching back to understand the child he once was. And this is what he says. It was 2015, and at the age of 12, my nan, the closest person to me, had a stroke on the 1st of March. In the evening, on the 1st of March, my dad had received a phone call out of the blue from my cousin. This was not a common occurrence at all. My dad answered to my cousin in tears and in panic. My dad, while rather confused, looked the most concerned I'd ever seen him to this day. I was in the room at the time of the phone call, but I had no clue what it was about at that time. My cousin had hung up and my dad, without explaining, said, "We need to go and pick Mum up," as my mum was actually at work at the time. So that's exactly what we did. As confused as I was, I went along with it, as I knew something was clearly not right. My dad found my mum's place of work while in the car and explained that my mum needs to come out of work as there's a family emergency. This is where I started to panic myself, but I still didn't know who or why. I didn't ask. What could I really say? My mum ran out of work and got in the car and we went to the hospital. This is the point in time where I learnt that my nan had had a stroke, and it wasn't a minor one. She had suffered a heavy stroke and broke her left hip. I remember looking out of the car window feeling absolutely distraught at the news. We arrived at the hospital and only my mum got out of the car. We drove home. Questions were in my mind and all I wanted to do was see if she was okay. We heard news not long after that my nan had gone into surgery and had a metal hip replacement as she had completely shattered the hip structure. At least, this is what I recall. I was only 12. Around a week later, I saw my nan since her stroke. My initial feelings were fear, not because I was scared of her, but because I was a 12-year-old seeing the closest person in my life in a hospital bed with half of her face, which looked like it had melted. Of course, this is where the details of her stroke began. She had lost all feeling in her left side. She couldn't move her left arm, hand, legs or toes, but oddly could move her index finger very briefly. At this point in time, she couldn't talk. All you could hear was a muffled noise. I said hello and sat beside her. I genuinely had no words that I could say. Now, over the next month, she had progressed. Things looked very promising. She was starting to talk a little more clearly, still without any feeling in her left side, and still, of course, bedridden. I visited every week, and I can't lie, it never got easier, but the progression made me feel positive that things would definitely get better. I had just turned 13 by now. Around 2 months later, my nan was put into a care home as she was strong enough for it at the time. Unfortunately, this only lasted a week as she had quickly deteriorated. But at least she got her birthday away from the hospital. She was taken to a health facility for stroke rehabilitation and neurological rehabilitation. This began to work very well. My nan started to look like she did before the stroke. She even managed to regain a form of feeling in her toes and her upper arm. Yet again, everything started to look upwards. However, little did any of us know quite the opposite was to happen only 2 weeks later. I can't go into specific detail, although I wish I could, but on the night of the 20th of June, my nan started to deteriorate extremely quickly, and in a really bad way. I wasn't there that night, but she sadly passed away in the early hours of the 21st of June, 2015. Although I was 13, I remember this bit significantly. It feels like yesterday, even 11 years later. It was a Sunday. I woke up very early. My mum wasn't home still. My dad had sat me down on the sofa and told me that my nan has sadly died and my mum is still at the hospital with everyone. I just remembered I was broken. I was crying. I remember playing Minecraft at the time to calm myself down. And while playing Minecraft, I built a church purely for my nan. In a childish sense, I believe if I did this, she was respected and safe. I remember visiting my nan's home on the day she passed with some of my family there. My aunt saying how surreal it feels, and she was right. None of it felt real at all. 2 weeks later, the funeral happened, and I remember being with my mum in my nan's house, saying the way I'll remember my nan, and that I'll know she's okay. If it's sunny, she's happy. And if it's raining, she's sad. To this day, my mind still goes there from time to time. Now, school at this time was extremely stressful and difficult. Most days, I'd be crying and upset that she had passed away. I can truly say it's one of the only times I have ever been lost in the emotion. It really didn't feel like it really had happened. Even now, 11 years later, I still can't fully comprehend that I will never see her again. The grief all round was immense. At home, I didn't have a mum for the moment. My mum was rightfully distraught and completely devastated. And in the grief I felt, I just couldn't make sense of literally anything. I'd go as far as randomly writing things on the mirror to give myself comfort that my nan was around or that she existed. I know some of the things I did could have been seen as disrespectful, but as a child navigating grief from my own perspective, it is an extremely challenging thing to deal with. 11 years on, there are times I cry. Times I think of her out of the blue, and times where I wish I could just be in the garden with her again playing Lego, as we usually did. I think back to the times when my family changed at the loss and how big of a part my nan played in our family. This wasn't just a loss to me. It shaped a new path in my life, one I had to navigate without the person who sat and watched me grow. I was a kid back then. I'm a man now. I hope I've made her proud of me. I hope that the man she sees when she's looking down from heaven is the man she knew I'd become. The boy she once knew, I hope this man she wanted me to become. And I hope, Nan, that you can hear this in heaven. I miss you beyond words can comprehend. 11 years may have passed, but grief doesn't disappear. There was a hole left when you passed away, one that couldn't ever be filled. When they say always remembered, I really mean I will always remember you. I will forever remember staying at your house as a kid and you allowing me to sleep by the window in your room. I'll always remember you giving me £2 more than everyone else when they wasn't looking. I will always remember you loving purple, but wearing blue and supporting my favourite football team with me. I'll always remember your little step that you used to sit at while you had your cigarettes. I'll always remember watching all the soaps with you and betting on different horses with you. But most of all, I will remember you and where you sat, because since you left that space on your sofa empty, I've sat there in your place, keeping it safe for you. And those were his words. And I must say they were very touching words, very heartfelt, and I am so sorry for your loss. I honestly am. That I barely even have the words, but I am truly sorry for your loss. And to remember all of this in such detail, especially as an adult now, the clarity it must have brought you must have been huge. And it must have been upsetting as well. And what I find so powerful about that story is that you can hear both versions of him in it. You can hear the child who was frightened in the car, not fully knowing what was happening. And you can hear the child sitting beside a hospital bed, trying to understand why the person he loved looked different and sounded different and could not move the way that she used to. You can hear the child who built a church in Minecraft because he needed to do something, anything, something that made his nan feel safe, respected, and remembered. And then you can hear the adult, the man looking back and realising that was grief, that was trauma, that was love with nowhere to go. And as a child, what he must have seen, what you must have seen, must have been so traumatic and confusing and terrifying. When you're a child, you don't understand the concepts of such illnesses straight away. I don't think you also can comprehend what death is at such an age. And that's the part people often miss. That children don't always grieve in ways that adults recognise. They may play games, they may invent signs, and they may write things down. They may attach meaning to weather or objects, seats and houses, gardens or small routines. And you know what? Years later, those things can still hold weight. Because when grief happens young, it doesn't just disappear just because you grow older. You actually grow around it, and you understand it differently. And you can find a new language for it. But the child inside you still remembers the moment the world changed. Now, to the person who sent me this, I have some words for you. Thank you for trusting me with this story, and thank you for allowing me to share your nan's memory with care. Thank you for showing what grief looked like when you were a child and what it feels like now that you are an adult looking back. your story shows something deeply important. That childhood grief does not become small just because time passes. 11 years later, you still remember where she sat. You still remember the garden. You still remember the football, the soaps, the step, the cigarettes, the £2, the little private acts of love that only you and your nan would understand. And I'll remind you that that's not weakness. That is devotion. That is memory doing its job. And I hope you know this. The child you were did his best with something so traumatic and unbearable. And the man you are now is honouring that little boy by telling the truth about it, the experience, the pain, what you had gone through as a child. And your nan would be proud of you. But more than that, I hope you are proud of the boy who survived losing her, because he deserved gentleness then, and you deserve gentleness now. Childhood trauma and grief is something that isn't always spoken about, to be honest. I don't think some adults that have experienced such traumatic things like this form of grief or any other form of grief, I don't think as an adult they can always find the words for it, or because it may be too painful for you. But what I want people to take from this episode is this. Childhood grief does not stay in childhood. It follows, and it changes shape, and it waits until we are old enough to understand it. And sometimes as adults, we have to go back and sit beside the younger versions of ourselves and finally say, you were not overreacting. You were grieving and you were heartbroken. You were trying to survive. And if you've lost someone when you were young and years later it still hurts, that does not mean that you're stuck. It means that the love was real and that the loss had mattered. It means part of you is still holding the hand of the child who didn't know how to say goodbye, who didn't know what to say, or how to deal with those feelings, where to put them, who to talk to. And if you know a child who is grieving, please do not assume that they are fine just because they are quiet or distracted or playing games or acting normal. And I say normal in quotation marks because sometimes, like this person, a child building something in Minecraft is building a memorial. Sometimes a child watching the weather is actually looking for a sign. Sometimes a child sitting in someone else's seat, they're just keeping the love alive in the only way that they know how. Because grief is not just about death. It is about the spaces people leave behind. And sometimes the empty seat says everything. Because an empty seat is not just empty. It holds the shape of someone who mattered, and it holds the conversations that will never happen again. The birthday cards that stop coming. The ordinary visits that become memories. The voice you can still hear in your head even when the room is silent. And when you are young, that empty seat can feel impossible to understand. You look at it and think, they should be there. They should still be sat there. They should still be laughing, smoking on that step, watching those soaps, handing you money when no one else is looking and talking about the football. Sitting in that garden and being a part of the world in the way that they always were. But then one day they're not, and nobody can explain that in a way that makes it feel fair. Nobody can say the perfect sentence that makes a child's heart accept the death that has happened. Because children do not need grief explained like a lesson. They need their grief witnessed. They need someone to notice that the world has changed for them too. They need someone to understand that even years later, when they are taller, when they are older, when they're stronger and quieter, when they're funnier or more busy, more grown up, there may be a younger version of them sitting somewhere inside, waiting for the person they lost to walk through that door. And maybe healing is not about leaving that child behind. Maybe healing is about going back for them, sitting beside them, letting them cry and ask why, letting them remember. letting them keep the signs, the rituals, the seat, the sunlight and the rain, perhaps even the Minecraft church, the mirror messages and the tiny sacred things that help them survive something too big. Because grief does not ask how old you are before it changes you. It does not wait until you are ready, and it does not soften itself because you are still in school or playing games or still trying to understand why adults look broken. It arrives and it takes someone, and then it leaves you with the love that has nowhere obvious to go. So you put it somewhere. Into a game, a seat, or the weather. You can put it into a memory or a sentence, into a story. And sometimes, years later, telling that story becomes its own kind of memorial. Not because it brings the person back, but because it says, you were here. You mattered. You shaped me. And you are still loved. And I think that is one of the most powerful things grief can teach us. That love does not end because a life has ended. It changes address. It moves into memory, and it moves into objects. It moves into the way we speak about them, the way that we carry them, in the way we sit in their place and keep it safe. So to anyone listening who lost someone when they were young, please know that you are not silly or dramatic, and you are not too sensitive at all. You are a child trying to understand goodbye. And if that goodbye still hurts now, there is nothing wrong with you. There is just love still living there. And to anyone supporting a grieving child, do not only listen to what they say. Watch what they build. Watch what they keep. Watch where they sit or what they ask. Watch what they repeat. Because sometimes a child's grief does not come out as words. Sometimes it comes out as a drawing or a game. A strange little belief, perhaps. A need to sleep somewhere, and a need to touch something that belonged to that person who's passed away. And a place to sit. And that place could be something that that person may have left behind. And those things all deserve the respect and acknowledgement and validation. Because beneath them is a child saying, in the only language that they may have, is, I miss them. I still need them. Please don't forget them. Please don't forget that I lost them too. And maybe that is the heart of this episode. That childhood grief does not vanish. It grows with us. It becomes part of the adult we become. And sometimes the adult has to speak for the child, because the child never got the chance to say all of it. So tonight, we honour the child who lost his nan. And we honour the man who still remembers her. And we honour every person who has ever sat beside an empty seat and understood that absence can be louder than noise. Because grief, it leaves marks, and so does love. And grief remembers where everyone used to sit. But I also think there is something important to say about the people who survive those early losses and grow up carrying them quietly. Sometimes when grief happens in childhood, you don't get the same space that adults are given. Adults are allowed to fall apart, and adults are asked how they are. Adults are expected to have complicated emotions. But children are often expected to carry on, go back to school or do homework, behave normally, sleep normally, eat normally, and be okay, because everyone assumes children are somehow protected by not fully understanding. But not understanding does not protect a child. Sometimes it actually makes it more frightening, because a child may not understand death fully, but they understand absence. They understand the missing person, and they understand the silence. They understand the change in the adults around them because they actually see it. You know that saying where children should be seen and not heard? Well, that could be what happens from a child's perspective. They may not be heard, but they see. They see everything. They hear everything. And more importantly, they feel everything. They understand the way the house feels different, even when nobody is saying it out loud. And when nobody helps them name that properly, they may spend years believing their reactions were strange, excessive, embarrassing, or wrong. Now, even for children that grieve, their actions are not wrong. Children only have a certain ability to convey their forms of grief, and it may not be in words or by crying. It can be behavioural changes and actions. They're trying to get it out the best way that they can. They may look back, adults may look back and judge the child that they were. That adult who went through such a traumatic grief. They may think, why did I do that? Why did I write that? Why did I believe that? And why did I cling to that seat or that sign, that weather, that game, that object? But let's not forget that grief is not always logical, especially not when it enters a young person's mind. A grieving child is not trying to make perfect sense, because how can they? All they are doing is trying to survive the shock of love being interrupted. So maybe one of the kindest things that we as adults can do is stop judging the way we coped when we were younger, or to stop judging the way children cope when they are going through current grief. When you're watching a child go through grief, maybe the rituals that look strange now were actually proof that some part of us was fighting to stay connected. Maybe the things we did as children were not shameful. Maybe they were sacred in their own way, in their own right. Just as adults, a child's grief can be messy, confusing and quiet, intense or creative, and invisible all at once. And that is why we have to be careful. Careful with grieving children. Careful with the adults who used to be grieving children. Careful with the stories people finally find the courage to tell years later. Because when someone shares a childhood loss, they are not only telling you what happened, they are letting you meet the younger version of them who had lived through it. That deserves tenderness. It deserves patience, and it deserves respect. So my advice to anyone listening who recognises themselves in this story: do not rush yourself to make peace with something that changed you before you even knew how to explain pain. Peace may come slowly. It may come in pieces. It may come through speaking or remembering. It may come through crying or laughing, or perhaps visiting places, or even avoiding places. Perhaps it's keeping objects or letting objects go. Perhaps it's finally saying out loud what you could not say back then. There is no perfect way to revisit childhood grief, not in any way. There is only an honest way. And honesty can be enough. Believe me, it can be more than enough. You do not have to force yourself to feel healed in any way whatsoever. And you do not have to prove you have moved on. Because we don't move on from grief, and I can't say that enough. There is never any moving on when it comes to grief. It stays with you for life, for the rest of your life. However, we can move forward. And that's okay too. You do not have to make your grief smaller so other people feel comfortable with how long that you may have carried it for. So what if it's been 11 years and you want to speak about it now? You have you have the entitlement to do so. You have full rights to do so. Anybody does. Some losses become part of your emotional landscape. They can shape who you are, especially if you've experienced it in your childhood. Your grief may shape who you are as an adult. I know for me personally, I had a childhood loss. My baby brother, he had passed away. And I tell you something, the trauma that left on me, on my siblings, on my mum, it was absolutely crippling, and it shaped who I became. It really did. But, these losses do become part of your emotional landscape. And it's not because you're broken, but because someone mattered enough to change the weather inside you. And to anyone who is, again, supporting someone who is opening up about a grief that had happened to them and experience a trauma like this in their childhood, do listen properly. Do not jump in with silver linings. Do not tell them it was a long time ago. And do not compare pain. Do not try to tidy the story before they have finished telling it. You could do the most simple thing and just listen. Let them speak as the adult they are now, and as the child they were then. Because sometimes being heard years later can reach a place that silence never did. Sometimes a person does not need advice straight away. Sometimes they need someone to sit beside the memory with them and say, I believe you. And that must have been incredibly hard. And you should not have had to carry that alone. And maybe that is where healing begins. Not with forgetting, and not with pretending it no longer hurts, but with finally giving the younger self the compassion they needed at the time. And so, as this episode comes to a close, I'd like to leave you with this. There are people we lose who never really leave the structure of who we become. They are in our humour, our softness, and our fears, our habits, or our favourite colours even, our private signs, and our need to protect others, in our ability to love deeply, even after loss has shown us how fragile everything actually is, and believe me, it is. And maybe that's why grief hurts so much, because it is not only about missing someone, it is about recognising how much of us was built beside them, how many parts of ourselves were shaped by their presence alone. And all it takes is one person, just one. And for this gentleman who wrote in, his nan shaped exactly who he was. She was his entire world. She meant so much to him. And it's also about recognising how much of our childhood and our safety, our belonging and our ordinary happiness was held in their hands. So when they go, we are not only grieving them, we are actually grieving the version of life that existed when they were still here. And that is not something you simply, and I quote this, get over, because you don't. That is something you learn to carry with more understanding, more honesty, and more kindness towards yourself. And so to the person who shared this story today, I want to say your nan clearly gave you more than just memories. She gave you a place in the world. She gave you warmth. And she gave you small private moments that still glow all these years later. And by telling this story, you have not only honoured her, you have honoured the child who loved her, the child who was confused and the child who was scared, the child who tried to build safety out of blocks, signs, weather and memory. And I tell you what, that child deserved to be seen. And I hope today he was. And to everyone listening, may we all learn, may we all please learn to treat our younger selves with more mercy. May we stop calling our survival strange. May we stop apologising for the ways that we tried to cope. May we remember as well that grief is not proof that love had failed, because it's nowhere near it, not even close. Instead, it is proof that love had somewhere beautiful to begin. And when an empty seat remains, maybe our job is not always to fill it. Maybe sometimes our job is simply to honour what that sacred seat had held. And the seat that your nan had was clearly sacred, and still is to this day. The memories that you have of your nan are very sacred, and they will never leave you. Your experience will never leave you. But I can tell you with absolute clarity and certainty and full respect and understanding that you most certainly have grown into a man that she would be proud of. And please do treat yourself with more kindness, especially your younger self. Don't doubt for a moment that your nan wouldn't be proud of you, because I'll tell you now, your nan would be more than proud. She would be honoured, and I believe that your nan would be more than honoured that you had gained the courage to speak on this podcast and to share your experiences. And that's what it's all about, sharing your experiences. And I hope that this episode has given you strength. I hope I was able to convey your words correctly, with emotional depth and understanding, with the deepest respects. And I give you my full condolences. I know what childhood loss is like, and it is very, very traumatic. It's very difficult to navigate, and to even remotely try and make sense of anything that had happened. It is almost, at the time, impossible, isn't it? But as a man now, you have clarity. You have understanding. So please do be kind to yourself and your memories. You were a child. Nothing that you would have done as a child could ever be seen as disrespectful, because children have a very different understanding than adults. They can only convey their pain and their grief in minimal ways. And we can all take something from that when we see a child grieve. Now, as promised, I do keep people's anonymity if they wish. I will never reveal who you are. I will only convey your words the way that you give them to me. So to anyone who has been listening, please do write in. You know, our email is also shown at the end of these videos. astoryofgrief@outlook.com is where you can write to us, and I will always be respectful. I hope we can all take something from this episode. Thank you to everyone who's actually been here to listen and to support, and as always, we will always be here 6 p.m. every Sunday. Have a good evening, guys.